I used to believe destruction came from hatred, from anger, from betrayal planned in advance. I was wrong. What destroys a marriage doesn't arrive screaming. It arrives quietly disguised as restlessness, as a question no one knows how to ask out loud. One day I was standing in my own kitchen looking at a woman I had built a life with and realizing she no longer recognized herself. Nothing dramatic had happened. No violence, no scandals. Just a slow, invisible shift that everyone pretends doesn't exist. People call it a phase, a crisis, a reinvention. I call it panic colliding with time. This story isn't about cheating. It isn't about bad husbands or broken homes. It's about what happens when identity collapses and biology stops negotiating. If you think this can't happen to you, that belief is exactly how it begins. Listen carefully. Not to judge, not to blame, but to understand what no one wants to say out loud. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. And if you want to hear the rest of this story, you can subscribe. Quietly. No pressure. Before anything broke, life looked complete. That is the dangerous part. Nothing appeared unstable. Nothing felt urgent. Our days moved with the quiet efficiency of a system that had been running for years. Mornings began early. Coffee, breakfast, school schedules, work calendars. Evenings closed with routines we no longer discussed because they no longer needed words. We had built something that functioned, and I mistook function for permanence. She was dependable. That word mattered to me. She handled the invisible labor without complaint. Doctor appointments, birthday planning, family trips that felt earned, not impulsive. She remembered details I forgot and smoothed edges I never noticed. When people described her, they used words like strong, reliable, grounded. I agreed with all of them. I trusted her the way you trust gravity, not because you think about it, but because it has never failed you before. I believe time worked in our favor. 15 years together felt like armor. Shared history, shared sacrifices, children, a mortgage. Arguments survived. Hard years passed. We had proof. That proof made me careless. I assumed loyalty deepened automatically with duration. I assumed that because she had chosen this life, once she would keep choosing it. I never considered that choice could expire. There were no obvious warning signs then. No secrecy, no hostility. If anything, she seemed calmer than before. Less dramatic, more settled. I interpreted that as maturity, growth. I told myself this was what stability looked like when youth burned out and something better replaced it. I was wrong about what replaced it. At night, we sat together on the couch, not touching much, but not distant either. Familiar, comfortable. We spoke about logistics, the kids, the house, plans weeks ahead. We didn't talk about dreams anymore, but I thought that was normal. I thought dreams were for people who hadn't built anything yet. I thought contentment was quiet by design. I didn't notice that contentment was not what she was feeling. I believed that being needed was the same as being valued. She was needed everywhere, at home, at work, by the kids, by me. I thought that was enough. I thought usefulness equaled worth. I never asked whether she still felt wanted in a way that had nothing to do with responsibility. I didn't think that question mattered anymore. Looking back, I can see how much I relied on the past to justify the present. Whenever doubt surfaced, I buried it under memory. Trips we took, letters she wrote, things she once said about forever. I treated those moments like deposits in a bank account, convinced I could keep withdrawing from them indefinitely. I didn't understand that emotional currency depreciates when it stops circulating. She rarely complained. That should have concerned me. Silence is often mistaken for peace. I told myself she was just tired. Life was busy. This phase would pass. Every marriage has seasons. That phrase gave me permission to stop paying attention. I also believed I knew her. Not superficially, deeply. I had seen her give birth. I had seen her exhausted, sick, overwhelmed. I had seen her cry and recover. I assumed exposure equaled understanding. I assumed proximity equaled insight. I never considered that people can change internally while remaining physically present. She still smiled, still laughed at familiar jokes, still showed up. But something subtle was already shifting. Her attention drifted more often, not dramatically, just enough to be dismissed. I noticed it and ignored it at the same time, because acknowledging it would have required me to question everything I felt secure about. I believed that commitment insulated us from biology, from time, from desire. I believed love matured past those forces. I believed vows rewrote human nature. I didn't realize that vows don't erase instincts. They only delay their consequences. At 30, she had been content with the life we built. Or at least she believed she was. That belief mattered then. But belief is not static. It changes when the internal framework supporting it shifts. And frameworks do not announce when they are weakening. I thought consistency meant satisfaction. She did the same things, so she must have felt the same things. I never considered that repetition can hollow meaning instead of reinforcing it. I thought predictability was safety. I didn't see that predictability can also become invisibility. There were moments I misread entirely. Times when she seemed distant, I assumed she needed rest. Times when she seemed irritable, I assumed stress. Times when she seemed unusually upbeat, I assumed gratitude. I interpreted everything through the lens of maintenance. I thought we were just keeping the machine running. What I didn't see was that she was no longer invested in maintaining anything. She was observing, measuring, comparing, quietly. The scariest part is how normal everything looked. Friends envied our stability. Family praised our partnership. From the outside, we were the example. Inside, something was loosening, but I didn't feel it yet. Because decay doesn't feel like collapse. It feels like nothing at all. I trusted history too much. I trusted structure. I trusted roles. Husband, wife, mother, provider. I believed those labels carried their own gravity. I believed identity stayed fixed once defined. I didn't understand that identity requires reinforcement, not repetition. If you had asked me then whether my marriage was in danger, I would have answered without hesitation. No, absolutely not. We had weathered too much, built too much, lost too much together for it to end quietly. I believed endings were loud. I believed they came with warning shots. I didn't know the most dangerous phase is the one where everything still works. The mistake I made was assuming change announces itself, that it comes with arguments, slammed doors, or sudden distance. Real change doesn't do that. Real change happens internally long before behavior catches up. By the time you see it, it's already finished rewriting the rules. I used to think age brought clarity, perspective, stability. That was the story we were told. That growing older meant shedding chaos, not creating it. But what no one prepared me for was the specific moment when biology stops cooperating with narrative. When the body and the mind quietly renegotiate their priorities without asking permission. Somewhere between 35 and 45, something fundamental shifts. Not gradually, not poetically, structurally. This isn't about wisdom or maturity. Those words are comforting lies. What actually happens is closer to a system update that overwrites previous settings. The reward circuits change. The reference points change. The sense of self is no longer anchored where it once was. The woman I married had a clear internal hierarchy. Family mattered. Stability mattered. Being chosen once and kept mattered. That hierarchy didn't collapse overnight. It eroded, slowly, invisibly. And the erosion followed biology, not intention. I want to be precise here. This wasn't a choice she consciously made. It was a process. Hormones shifted. Feedback loops weakened. The things that once provided satisfaction stopped registering with the same intensity. What used to feel meaningful began to feel muted. Not bad, just dull. And dullness is intolerable to a brain that was once flooded with validation. At 30, her sense of self aligned with her circumstances. She was a wife, a mother, needed, desired enough. The world still responded to her presence. At 40, the world responded differently. Not cruelly, indifferently. That distinction matters. Indifference cuts deeper than rejection because it offers no resistance to push against. She didn't wake up one morning hating her life. She woke up feeling unfamiliar inside it. That's a much more dangerous sensation. Hatred can be confronted. Unfamiliarity creates curiosity, comparison, longing, and longing doesn't need logic to grow. I didn't understand that her priorities were being reordered from the inside out. The stability she once protected started to feel like confinement. The routine she once valued began to feel repetitive. The predictability she once needed began to feel suffocating. Not because anything changed externally, but because her internal calibration had shifted. This is where men misunderstand the situation. We assume dissatisfaction requires cause. We look for failures, neglect, abuse, some identifiable mistake. But in this phase, dissatisfaction often has no moral origin. It's chemical, neurological, existential, and that makes it impossible to negotiate with. Her brain was no longer rewarding the same behaviors. The things I did for years without thinking stopped landing the same way. Consistency no longer felt reassuring. It felt invisible. Familiar gestures lost their emotional charge. They still registered intellectually, but not emotionally. And emotions are what drive behavior when identity is under threat. I noticed subtle changes long before I recognized their meaning. She asked different questions, not directly, casually. Questions about people we knew who had started over, about women who had reinvented themselves, about whether people ever regret staying more than leaving. At the time, I answered practically, logically. I didn't realize these questions weren't theoretical. They were diagnostic. Her attention began drifting toward herself in a way it hadn't before. Not narcissistic, evaluative. She watched herself more closely, in mirrors, in photos, in reflections, as if checking for continuity between who she remembered being and who she saw now. That continuity was breaking. This is the part no one wants to say out loud. Identity built on being desired does not age gracefully. It panics. When the external confirmation slows down, the internal structure starts shaking. And once that structure destabilizes, everything attached to it becomes negotiable, including marriage. I thought our history anchored her. I thought shared sacrifice created permanence. I didn't understand that history only holds power if it aligns with the present self. Once the present self no longer recognizes the person who built that history, the past loses authority. She wasn't becoming reckless. She was becoming hungry. Hungry for proof that she still existed as something other than a function, something other than a role. Wife, mother, organizer, manager. Those identities are essential, but they are not intoxicating. They don't spark desire. They don't produce adrenaline. At 30, that didn't matter. At 40, it mattered more than anything. Her priorities didn't change because she became selfish. They changed because her brain started interpreting safety as stagnation, and stagnation as threat. That's the cruel paradox. The very things that make a life stable can become the evidence a panicking mind uses to justify escape. I was still operating under the old contract. Provide, be reliable, be present, don't rock the boat. I believed those behaviors compounded value over time. I didn't realize the metric had changed. She wasn't measuring depth anymore. She was measuring intensity. This wasn't a phase she could think her way out of. You can't argue with a nervous system. You can't logic someone back into feeling rewarded by things their brain has stopped responding to. And you definitely can't compete with novelty when novelty activates pathways that familiarity no longer reaches. The most unsettling realization came later. The woman I thought I knew wasn't acting out of malice or boredom. She was acting out of fear. Fear of time, fear of fading, fear that the version of herself that once mattered to the world was gone for good. And I represented that fear. Not intentionally, symbolically. I was proof of years past, of choices made, of paths closed. My presence reminded her that youth doesn't return, that options narrow, that stories end, and no one wants to be standing next to the evidence of their own mortality when panic sets in. Men assume love protects them from this. It doesn't. Love requires continuity of identity. When identity fractures, love becomes collateral damage. Not because it wasn't real, but because it belonged to someone who no longer exists. I didn't lose my wife because she stopped caring. I lost her because she became someone else before I noticed the original version was already gone. The collapse didn't begin with anger. It began in the mirror, quietly, privately, without witnesses. That's where the foundation cracked. Not because she suddenly hated what she saw, but because what she saw no longer matched who she believed she was. From the beginning, her value had been reflected back to her through attention. That wasn't vanity. It was conditioning. From childhood onward, the message was consistent. Be attractive, be chosen, be wanted. That message doesn't disappear when life becomes serious. It just goes dormant, waiting for reinforcement. For 2 decades, reinforcement was constant. Compliments, glances, interest, desire. It arrived without effort. It confirmed her place in the world. Between 15 and 35, the system works flawlessly. She doesn't question it. She doesn't even notice it. Attention is ambient. Like oxygen, you only become aware of it when it thins. And when it does, panic sets in long before understanding does. At 40, she wasn't ugly. That's an important distinction. She simply wasn't young anymore. And youth, not beauty, was the currency she had unknowingly built her identity around. Youth had carried promise. Youth had implied endless possibility. Youth had kept doors open without asking which ones mattered. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't see decline. She saw difference. And difference is destabilizing when your sense of self depends on continuity. The face she recognized from memory was gone, replaced by something unfamiliar, something quieter, something that didn't provoke the same reactions from the world. The world didn't insult her. It just stopped responding the way it used to. Smiles became polite. Compliments became rare. Attention became conditional. And because this shift happened gradually, it felt personal, as if she had failed some unspoken test. This wasn't about wanting to be admired. It was about losing the framework that told her who she was. Her identity had been reinforced externally for decades. Now that reinforcement was weakening, and without it, the structure couldn't support itself. I often think about how men misunderstand this phase because we don't experience aging the same way. Our value was never primarily tied to being visually desired. It was tied to what we could do. Provide, build, achieve. Those metrics increase with time. Hers didn't. Hers peaked early and it declined quietly. That asymmetry creates resentment, even when no one names it. She wasn't jealous of me. She was terrified of what time was doing to her reflection. And terror makes people behave irrationally. It narrows perspective. It accelerates decision-making. It prioritizes relief over consequence. Imagine building your entire sense of worth on a single asset without realizing it. Then imagine that asset depreciating without warning. That's what happened. And when that realization hits the mind, it doesn't calmly adjust. It scrambles to compensate. She started searching for confirmation, not consciously, instinctively. Small signals at first, a longer look in a mirror, a new angle in a photo, a comment she replayed in her head longer than necessary. Each one became evidence, proof she still existed in the way that mattered to her. This is where men often mislabel the behavior as insecurity. That's not accurate. Insecurity implies doubt. What she felt was identity loss. The difference is crucial. Doubt can be reassured. Identity loss demands reconstruction, and reconstruction often requires destruction. The tragedy is that none of this feels dramatic to the person experiencing it. It feels urgent, necessary, as if something essential is slipping away and must be grabbed before it disappears entirely. That urgency overrides loyalty. It overrides memory. It overrides responsibility. She didn't want to be younger. She wanted to feel chosen the way she once did. Desired without context, wanted without obligation. The kind of desire that exists purely because it cannot, because it should. I was never going to provide that again. Not because I didn't love her, but because I was already there. My desire was assumed, expected, guaranteed. And guaranteed desire has no adrenaline. It doesn't spike dopamine. It doesn't reassure a collapsing identity. That's the cruel irony. The man who chose her when she had options becomes the least validating presence when she fears she has none left. Commitment becomes background noise. Reliability becomes invisibility. I didn't understand that she wasn't asking herself whether she was loved. She was asking whether she was still desirable. Those are not the same question. And the second one is far more dangerous when left unanswered. Every aging sign became symbolic. Not just wrinkles or changes in her body, but moments. Birthdays. Comments about age. References to the past. Each one reinforced the same message. Time is moving forward, and it isn't waiting for you. Instead of grieving that loss, instead of integrating it into a new identity, she resisted it. And resistance requires energy. That energy had to go somewhere. It couldn't go into the life she already had, because that life represented the years she was trying to escape. So the war began. Not against me, directly. Against reality. Against limitation. Against the idea that a chapter had closed. And when people fight reality, they don't choose rational targets. They choose symbols. I was one of them. I represented permanence, duration, consequence. I represented staying. and staying felt like surrender to time. So everything associated with staying began to feel threatening. This is the point where marriages don't just strain, they destabilize. Not because of conflict, but because of misalignment. Two people living under the same roof, operating under entirely different psychological frameworks. I was protecting what we built. She was trying to reclaim what she believed she was losing. Those goals are incompatible, and once identity is involved, compromise becomes impossible. The hardest part is that she didn't know this was happening in clear terms. She just felt restless, dissatisfied, understimulated. She interpreted those feelings as signals, not symptoms. And when feelings become directives, reason steps aside. I didn't lose her to another man at this stage. I lost her to the idea that she was fading. And nothing terrifies a person more than the belief that their relevance has an expiration date they didn't consent to. The hunger didn't announce itself loudly. It crept in through small moments most men would dismiss. A compliment that lingered longer than it should have. A smile from a stranger that stayed with her through the day. At 22, those things meant nothing. They were background noise. She expected them. They confirmed nothing because nothing was in question. At 42, they landed differently. They hit a nervous system already starving. This is where the danger actually begins. Not with affairs, not with lies, with dopamine. With the sudden realization that validation still exists, but no longer arrives automatically. When it does arrive, it feels like oxygen after being underwater too long. I didn't understand the asymmetry at first. My attention was constant, reliable. I was there every day. I desired her. I chose her. I showed up. I thought consistency compounded value. I didn't realize consistency loses contrast over time. And without contrast, the brain stops responding. There's a truth no one wants to say because it sounds cruel. Obligated attention doesn't register as validation when identity is collapsing. Chosen attention does. Mine was guaranteed. Theirs was optional. That difference changes everything. When a stranger notices her, his attention carries risk. He doesn't have to be there. He doesn't benefit from staying. His interest exists because he wants it to. That makes it intoxicating. Not because it's deep, but because it's voluntary. And voluntariness is what her brain was desperate to feel again. This is why married women over 40 become the easiest targets. Not because they are immoral, not because they are bored, because they are hungry for something their husbands can no longer provide in the same way. The thrill of being chosen by someone who doesn't owe them anything. My devotion didn't disappear. It simply stopped registering as proof. Proof requires uncertainty. My presence eliminated uncertainty. That made me safe. And safe felt invisible. Once she experienced that first hit of external validation, something changed permanently. Not immediately, not visibly, but irreversibly. She remembered a feeling she hadn't realized she missed. Being pursued. Being wanted without context. Being someone's fantasy instead of someone's routine. That memory didn't fade. It lodged itself in her nervous system like an itch. And no amount of stability can scratch an itch caused by novelty deprivation. I could plan trips, dinners, weekends away. None of it mattered. My efforts were processed as maintenance, not excitement, not proof. I started noticing a shift in how she spoke about the past. That was the real signal. She stopped talking about her younger years with embarrassment. The tone changed. Stories that used to end with relief now ended with nostalgia. Ex-boyfriends were no longer mistakes. They were experiences. memories she revisited with a softness that hadn't been there before. When someone begins romanticizing who they used to be, it means they've stopped accepting who they are. That's when the countdown starts. Her brain was no longer satisfied by small gestures. Holding hands used to be enough. Shared jokes, familiar intimacy. At 40, those things barely registered. Her neurological reward system had adapted. What once created excitement now produced a faint echo. She needed stronger stimulation just to feel something. This isn't opinion, it's chemistry. The same system that once lit up with small romantic cues now required emotional earthquakes. That's why long-term partners feel dull during this phase. Not because they are dull, but because familiarity doesn't trigger novelty pathways. And I was the definition of familiar. I became neurologically invisible. That realization came later, but the effects showed up early. Conversations felt flatter. My presence didn't energize her. She wasn't angry. She was disengaged. And disengagement is far more dangerous than conflict. I tried to compensate without knowing what I was compensating for. I listened more. I planned more. I worked on myself. It didn't matter. Improvement within a familiar frame doesn't create dopamine. It just maintains baseline. What she needed wasn't a better version of me. She needed a different chemical response. And that response doesn't care about history, loyalty, or children. It responds to uncertainty, to possibility, to risk. This is why the most vicious betrayals don't happen at 25. They happen after 35, when the gap between who someone was and who they are becomes unbearable. When the need to feel alive overrides the need to be good. I've seen it too many times to deny it. Women who were loyal for decades, suddenly capable of cruelty they never displayed before. Not because they changed morally, but because desperation changes thresholds. What would have felt unthinkable at 30 feels justified at 40 if it promises relief. The same woman who was content with simple affection at 20 now needs an emotional affair just to feel a spark, not because she's greedy. Because her brain has adapted to years of stimulation and now requires more to register pleasure. I didn't recognize the early signs because they didn't look dramatic. She lit up slightly more when someone new paid attention. Her mood shifted subtly when she felt noticed. I told myself it was confidence returning. I didn't see that confidence built on external validation is always temporary. Once she knew that outside attention still worked, the marriage entered the danger zone. Not because she acted immediately, but because knowledge changes behavior. She now knew she had options, or at least the illusion of them. And illusion is enough to destabilize commitment. She began comparing without admitting she was comparing. Not me against another man specifically. Me against a feeling. Against a memory. Against a version of herself that no longer existed. And no real person can compete with an internal fantasy. This is where men get blindsided. We look for cheating, for secrecy, for evidence. But the real betrayal happens earlier. It happens the moment your devotion becomes less valuable than a stranger's smile. I didn't understand why my attention stopped counting. I thought love accumulated. I didn't know it depreciated when taken for granted. I didn't know that being locked in disqualifies you from validating someone whose identity depends on being chosen. The irony is brutal. The more reliable I was, the less stimulating I became. The more I stayed, the less I mattered emotionally. Because stability doesn't reassure someone afraid of fading. It confirms the passage of time they are trying to deny. Once the hunger sets in, it doesn't go away on its own. It escalates. What starts as a glance becomes a need. What starts as curiosity becomes fixation. And all of it happens internally long before behavior crosses a line. By the time I understood what was happening, the real shift had already occurred. She wasn't deciding whether to stay anymore. She was deciding how much validation she needed to feel alive. And once that question replaces the question of commitment, the outcome is already determined. The signs were never hidden. That's the part that haunts most men afterward. We say we didn't see it coming because admitting we saw it and dismissed it is harder to live with. The truth is, the warning signals don't arrive as confessions. They arrive as shifts in tone, attention, and allegiance. It always starts with nostalgia, not casual remembering, but romantic revision. She began talking about her past with a softness that hadn't been there before. Stories that once ended in embarrassment now ended in laughter. The wild years weren't reckless anymore. They were alive, full of color, full of feeling. She spoke about who she used to be, as if that person had been stolen from her rather than replaced by choice. Old photos came out, not to laugh at, but to study. She lingered on them, compared them, not openly, but long enough for it to register. I noticed it and told myself it was harmless. Everyone reminisces. Everyone wonders. I didn't understand that she wasn't remembering. She was mourning. When someone mourns a version of themselves, they stop investing in the present. The present becomes a reminder of loss, not something to protect. And once that mental shift happens, everything attached to the present starts to feel negotiable. Then came the new friendships. This is where the acceleration begins. Not all friends are dangerous. Only a specific kind. Divorced women who describe themselves as free, reborn, finally living for themselves. They frame their past marriages as cages they escaped rather than structures they abandoned. They spoke in absolutes. You deserve better. Life is short. Don't settle. These weren't conversations. They were indoctrinations. They gathered over wine, but what they really shared was grievance. Each story reinforced the same narrative. Marriage suppresses. Responsibility suffocates. Staying is weakness. Leaving is courage. Your stable life was slowly reframed as a mistake you were too scared to correct. I watched her come home from those nights different. Not intoxicated, energized, validated, armed with new language. Words like needs, identity, self-neglect. Concepts that sound mature until you realize they are being used to justify abandonment. These women weren't offering wisdom. They were offering permission. Permission to reinterpret her entire life through the lens of victimhood. And once someone accepts that framing accountability disappears, social media sealed the process. What started as casual scrolling turned obsessive. Hours disappeared. Her phone became an extension of her hand. She consumed stories of transformation. Women who started over at 40. Love rediscovered. Passion reclaimed. The algorithm learned her hunger and fed it relentlessly. What she wasn't seeing was reality. She was seeing marketing, carefully edited lives, filtered happiness, narratives crafted to sell the idea that reinvention has no cost. Every post confirmed what her panicking mind wanted to believe, that everyone else was happier, that staying was settling, that leaving was brave. Comparison became constant, not between marriages, but between her real life and digital fantasy. That's an unwinnable comparison. Reality has friction. Fantasy doesn't. Reality requires compromise. Fantasy only requires belief. Then the physical changes escalated. At first it looked reasonable. new skincare, better routines, self-care. I encouraged it. I thought she was investing in herself. I didn't realize she was fighting time. And fighting time requires escalation. The maintenance became obsession, procedures she once mocked, diets that bordered on punishment, exercise that wasn't about health but urgency, clothes that didn't belong to the woman she was but to the girl she remembered. She wasn't trying to look good. She was trying to look young. Those are not the same goal. Every purchase carried desperation. Every workout was a negotiation with fear. Every selfie was rehearsed, angles practiced, light tested. She wasn't seeking admiration. She was checking whether admiration was still possible. Finally, the emotional withdrawal began. This is where men feel it, but can't name it. She needed space, me time, new commitments that didn't exist before and didn't come with clear explanations. Her schedule filled with ambiguity. Her availability shrank. She either picked fights constantly or became eerily pleasant. Both are dangerous. Constant conflict means she's building a case, collecting evidence, justifying departure. Unusual kindness means guilt management. Either way, the outcome is the same. I sensed the distance but misread its cause. I assumed stress, burnout, hormonal changes. I suggested rest, therapy, time away together. None of it mattered because I was treating symptoms while the disease advanced. What I didn't understand was that she wasn't pulling away from me. She was pulling toward a narrative where leaving made sense. And once that narrative solidifies, facts become irrelevant. She began reframing normal marital dynamics as oppression. Compromise became sacrifice. Responsibility became burden. Routine became prison. The language shifted. That's always the tell. When someone starts changing the words they use, they're changing the story they're telling themselves. And stories shape decisions. Her friends reinforced it. Social media amplified it. Culture celebrated it. Every signal she received pointed in the same direction. You are not wrong. You are not selfish. You are brave. No one asked about the cost. No one talked about the aftermath. No one mentioned the children. No one acknowledged that freedom purchased through destruction still carries debt. I was still trying to fix a relationship. She was preparing to exit an identity. Those are not compatible goals. The most painful realization came much later. By the time I noticed the signs, clearly they were no longer warnings. They were confirmations. The decision wasn't being debated anymore. It was being justified. Men think betrayal starts when secrets start. It doesn't. It starts when loyalty is reinterpreted as limitation, when history becomes evidence of wasted time instead of shared meaning. Everything she did made sense within her new framework. That's why nothing I said reached her. We weren't speaking the same psychological language anymore. I was defending a life. She was defending a feeling, and feelings don't negotiate. They demand action. I didn't lose her suddenly. I lost her gradually, one reframing at a time, one story at a time, one comparison at a time, until the version of me that mattered no longer existed in her internal narrative. By the time the distance became undeniable, the detonation was already inevitable. Escalation never looks like escalation from the inside. It feels like correction, like adjustment, like doing what needs to be done before it's too late. That's how she experienced it. From my side, it looked like fragmentation, one change at a time, small enough to rationalize, significant enough to add up. The physical transformation intensified first. What had begun as maintenance crossed a line into urgency. The workouts became compulsive, not energizing, punitive. Food stopped being nourishment and became negotiation. Carbohydrates were enemies. Rest days were failures. Every calorie carried moral weight. She wasn't pursuing health. She was running from a clock she could hear ticking louder each year. Her body became a project, a battlefield, and projects demand focus. That focus had to come from somewhere. It came from us. Clothes changed next, not gradually, strategically. Styles that didn't belong to her life or her age appeared in the closet. They weren't chosen for comfort or appropriateness. They were chosen to provoke reaction, not mine. Someone else's. Someone undefined but very real in her imagination. She spent more time preparing to leave the house than she used to. More time in front of mirrors. More time adjusting, checking, recalibrating. She wasn't admiring herself. She was assessing, measuring whether the transformation was working. I tried to compliment her. It didn't land. My words sounded rehearsed to her, even when they weren't. Familiar voices don't validate someone desperate for novelty. They confirm routine. She smiled politely, moved on. My approval no longer had currency. Then came the emotional distance. Not coldness, absence. She was physically present, but psychologically elsewhere. Conversations became transactional. Necessary information exchanged efficiently. Anything deeper was deflected. She didn't argue much anymore. She disengaged. That's when many men relax. Conflict disappearing feels like peace. It isn't. It's resignation, or worse, redirection. She began carving out private time, space that didn't include me, gym sessions that ran long, errands that took hours, meetings that weren't clearly defined. When I asked, she answered calmly, reasonably, too reasonably. Explanations prepared in advance are never innocent. Her phone became guarded, not dramatically, subtly. Screen angled away, notifications silenced, passwords changed, not because she was hiding something specific yet, but because privacy had become a tool, a buffer between her internal process and external accountability. There were two emotional modes she oscillated between. Both were alarming. One was irritability, short temper, picking fights over minor things, revisiting old arguments, reframing neutral moments as slights. This was evidence gathering. She was building a case for herself, for others, for the story she would eventually tell. The other mode was unsettling kindness, warmth without intimacy, politeness without connection. This wasn't love returning. It was guilt management. The calm before impact. People become kind when they're about to do something they know will hurt someone. Either way, the outcome was predetermined. I could feel myself becoming irrelevant emotionally, not unloved, unnecessary. She didn't need my reactions anymore. She didn't seek my reassurance. She didn't need my approval. That's when you know you're already losing someone, when your responses stop mattering. I tried to address it directly once, asked if she was happy. She answered without hesitation, "I don't know." That answer was honest and terrifying. Uncertainty at this stage isn't confusion, it's preparation. I suggested counseling. She didn't refuse. She delayed. Delay is a decision disguised as openness. She wasn't interested in fixing anything. She was interested in buying time while she figured out her next move. What I didn't realize then was that I had become neurologically invisible. My presence no longer activated her emotionally, not positively, not negatively. I had become neutral stimulus, background. And background doesn't compete with novelty. Her brain needed intensity, uncertainty, the kind of emotional spikes that come from possibility, not permanence. I represented permanence, predictability, consequence. I represented the years she was trying not to think about. Everything about me reminded her of time passing. Shared memories, children, responsibilities. Even my love felt like pressure. Not because it was demanding, but because it anchored her to a version of herself she no longer wanted to inhabit. I tried changing myself, not dramatically, subtly. Better shape, better presence, more attention. It didn't matter. Self-improvement within an old frame doesn't reset attraction. It just polishes familiarity. This is where men exhaust themselves, competing with a feeling they don't understand, using tools that no longer work. Effort, consistency, reliability. Those tools build families. They don't revive collapsing identities. The more I leaned in, the more she leaned out. Not out of spite, out of necessity. She needed distance to imagine a different life. My closeness interfered with that fantasy. She began to disappear emotionally before she disappeared physically. That's the part people don't talk about. The marriage ends internally long before paperwork appears. By the time words like separation surface, the relationship has already been buried. I could sense she was rehearsing conversations in her head, practicing explanations, rationalizations. She wasn't deciding whether to leave anymore. She was deciding how to explain leaving in a way that preserved her self-image. I wasn't her partner in this phase. I was an obstacle. Not actively, symbolically. I stood between her and the relief she believed awaited her on the other side of destruction. This is where many men still believe they can turn it around. That one conversation, one realization, one breakthrough will bring her back. That belief is comforting. It's also wrong. Once someone associates their sense of aliveness with absence from you, proximity becomes suffocating. Your love becomes noise. Your concern becomes intrusion. Your presence becomes proof of stagnation. I wasn't losing a negotiation. I was losing relevance. And relevance once gone doesn't return through effort. It returns through identity realignment. And that was no longer possible within the life we shared. She wasn't drifting anymore. She was accelerating toward something undefined, toward a feeling she believed was running out of time. And I was no longer part of that destination. The distance I felt wasn't temporary. It was structural. The emotional architecture of our marriage had shifted. Weight-bearing walls removed. Support beams gone. Everything still looked intact from the outside, but the integrity was already compromised. I didn't know it then, but we had crossed the point where intention mattered. The process had momentum now. And momentum doesn't stop because someone finally notices. By the time I understood the escalation for what it was, I wasn't witnessing a crisis. I was witnessing the final stage of detachment. The quiet part before collapse. What enraged me later wasn't just what happened inside my home. It was how enthusiastically the outside world helped it along. The destruction didn't occur in isolation. It was encouraged, validated, and applauded. Every institution that should have injected restraint instead offered justification. The message was always the same. Your happiness matters. You deserve more. Never settle. Find yourself. On the surface, these sound harmless, empowering even. But when delivered to someone in the middle of an identity collapse, they function like accelerants. They don't calm panic. They legitimize it. No one asked her what more actually meant. No one asked what she was trading away. No one asked who would absorb the cost of her liberation. The language of self-fulfillment conveniently erased responsibility. Feelings were elevated above commitments. Desire outranked duty. Stability was reframed as stagnation. Therapy culture didn't help. It gave her vocabulary without wisdom. Words like boundaries needs authenticity, useful concepts when applied honestly, dangerous when weaponized. They became tools to pathologize normal marital friction. Discomfort became trauma. Compromise became self-betrayal. Every grievance found validation. Every doubt found confirmation. There was no counterweight, no voice saying this feeling will pass. This urge is temporary. This decision is irreversible. Nobody told her the truth. That happiness built on novelty collapses the moment novelty fades. The cultural double standard became impossible to ignore. When men hit midlife, they're mocked for their crises. A sports car, a new hobby, an adventure. Embarrassing, but contained. When women hit midlife, their crises are celebrated as rebirth. Courage, strength, finally choosing themselves. The scale of destruction doesn't factor into the applause. Men age into value. Society tells us that. Experience, resources, confidence, even physical decline is reframed as distinction. We are allowed to feel settled without feeling erased. Women aren't given that permission. Every birthday after 35 is treated like a countdown. Subtle, relentless. Youth is currency, and everyone can see the exchange rate dropping. That asymmetry creates terror, and terror doesn't produce wisdom, it produces urgency. This is why the responses diverge so sharply. Men attempt to reclaim youth through addition, new toys, new challenges. They add to their lives. Women attempt to reclaim youth through subtraction. They remove anything that reminds them of time past, including families. I saw this clearly only after the fact. At the time, it felt like I was being left behind by a culture sprinting toward validation at any cost. Every article she read, every interview she watched, every quote she shared reinforced the same narrative. Staying is fear. Leaving is bravery. Social media made it inescapable. Algorithms don't care about truth. They care about engagement. And nothing engages like transformation stories, especially the kind that promise happiness without consequence. She wasn't comparing her marriage to other marriages. She was comparing it to curated fantasies designed to sell hope. She didn't see the aftermath. No one posts that part. The loneliness after the excitement fades. The exhaustion of starting over. The quiet realization that attention isn't the same as connection. That being desired isn't the same as being known. The culture didn't show her Christmas mornings alone, or the children adapting to split lives, or the way novelty turns ordinary faster than you expect. Those images don't perform well online. The cruelest part is how society reframes accountability. If a man leaves his family in a midlife crisis, he's irresponsible. If a woman does it, she's courageous. The outcome is the same. Broken homes, confused children, permanent scars. But the narrative changes based on who is panicking. I watched her absorb this messaging and change. Slowly, confidently, she began speaking in absolutes. This is what I need. This is my truth. Those phrases shut down conversation. You can't argue with truth once it's declared. You can only submit or be labeled oppressive. I became careful with my words. Anything I said could be reframed as control. Concern became manipulation. Questions became pressure. Silence became neglect. There was no winning position because the framework itself had turned adversarial. This is where men break. We try to reason within a system that no longer values reason. We present evidence, history, sacrifice. It doesn't matter. You're no longer debating facts. You're threatening a story someone needs to survive their own choices. She needed to believe she was escaping something terrible, because leaving something good for a feeling is too heavy to carry, honestly. The culture gave her the script. All she had to do was step into it. I started noticing how quickly narratives hardened. Our entire history was being rewritten in real time. Moments that were once loving became controlling in hindsight. Arguments that were mutual became one-sided oppression. Memory was no longer shared, it was being edited. And society supported the edit. Friends nodded, therapists validated, comment sections cheered. No one asked about nuance. Nuance doesn't go viral. What stunned me most was how effectively responsibility vanished. Her feelings were treated as self-justifying. If she felt trapped, then she was trapped. If she felt unhappy, then something must have been wrong. Feelings became facts, and facts became irrelevant. There was no space for the idea that discomfort can be part of a meaningful life, that boredom can coexist with depth, that excitement isn't the metric of value. Those ideas are old, unprofitable, unshareable. By the time I recognized the scale of the cultural influence, it was too late. She wasn't just leaving me. She was aligning herself with a worldview that required her to leave. Staying would have contradicted everything she had been told about empowerment and self-worth. I wasn't competing with another man yet. I was competing with an ideology, one that promised liberation and delivered permission, one that framed destruction as healing and selfishness as growth. That ideology doesn't care about children, or vows, or long-term consequences. It only cares about feelings in the moment. And moments pass. Damage doesn't. I saw how easily society absolved her before she even acted, how it preemptively validated her future choices, how it positioned her as a heroine regardless of outcome. That validation removed the last barrier. Guilt. Once guilt is gone, restraint follows. She didn't need courage anymore. She had approval, and approval is far more powerful than desire. Desire motivates. Approval legitimizes. It tells you that even if you destroy something, you will be celebrated for the act itself. That's when I understood something deeply unsettling. This wasn't just a personal failure. It was systemic. A culture that confuses impulse with insight will always create casualties. Families are just the most visible ones. By the time she fully embraced that narrative, my role was sealed. I wasn't a partner worth fighting for. I was an artifact of a life she was being told to outgrow. And when a society convinces someone that their commitments are obstacles to self-actualization, then there is no argument left to make. Only damage left to absorb. The moment she left, history didn't just end. It was erased. Rewritten with a precision that stunned me. Years collapsed into a single narrative, and that narrative had only one requirement: I had to become the villain. Overnight, our marriage transformed from something shared into something she claimed she had survived. The language shifted completely. We were never really happy. I was pretending the whole time. He controlled me. He never really saw me. These statements weren't reflections. They were defenses. Because no one can live with the truth that they destroyed something good for a feeling. That truth would crush them. So the past had to be altered. Every memory was edited. Joy became illusion. Compromise became oppression. Stability became stagnation. Arguments that once resolved were reclassified as abuse. Normal marital tension was retroactively diagnosed as trauma. The entire relationship was pathologized so her exit could feel necessary instead of reckless. This isn't confusion. It's psychological self-preservation. I remember speaking to another man whose wife left after nearly 2 decades. She told everyone he had been emotionally abusive, distant, neglectful. He couldn't understand it. He still had the evidence. Photos, videos, messages she had written months before leaving. Declarations of love, gratitude, plans for the future. According to her new story, all of it was fake. 18 years of pretending. That kind of rewriting isn't about truth. It's about coherence. She needed a story where she was justified, brave, and misunderstood. And that story required a villain. So one was assigned. Once that process begins, there's no appealing to shared reality. Facts don't survive contact with narrative. Memory becomes selective, evidence becomes irrelevant. Anyone who challenges the story becomes part of the problem. The children were the hardest part. They weren't considered participants in her decision. They were considered adaptable, resilient. Children are always described that way by adults who need to feel less guilty. She told herself they would understand, that they wanted her to be happy, that they would adjust. But children don't care about adult fulfillment. They care about consistency, safety, predictability. They care about both parents being there when they wake up and when they go to sleep. They care about the house staying the same, about holidays feeling familiar, about not having to choose sides. Her midlife panic outweighed all of that. They became collateral damage in her war against time, shuttled between homes, exposed to narratives they didn't choose, asked to accept changes they had no control over. And they would carry the consequences long after the excitement that fueled the decision wore off. What struck me was the timing. It was almost always the same. Right when life should have been getting easier. The kids older, less hands-on care required, more freedom, more space to breathe. That space became dangerous. With time to think came comparison. With comparison came dissatisfaction. With dissatisfaction came revisionism. She started measuring her real life against imagined alternatives, against who she might have been, against who she thought she deserved to be. She wasn't comparing her life to reality. She was comparing it to a fantasy frozen at 25. Endless possibility. Infinite desire. No consequences. That fantasy doesn't age. Reality does. And reality always loses that comparison. She remembered herself as young, admired, full of potential. She saw herself now as ordinary, a wife, a mother, roles that don't photograph well on social media. The gap between memory and present became unbearable. So the present had to be destroyed to preserve the fantasy. What she didn't see was the aftermath. No one prepares them for that part. The 6 months later moment, when the new relationship reveals itself to be just another flawed human, when the attention fades, when novelty becomes routine again. She didn't see the exhaustion of starting over at 40. Dating apps, awkward conversations, realizing that the men offering attention aren't offering commitment, that being desired doesn't mean being valued, that attention without investment is cheap. She didn't see the quiet nights, the empty house, the holidays split in half, the children choosing where they feel safest. She didn't see the realization that she traded depth for stimulation, partnership for performance, meaning for momentary intensity. The culture doesn't show that part. It doesn't sell well. What became clear to me was how different aging is processed psychologically. Men are told they're entering their prime, and distinguished, experienced, valuable. Even as their bodies change, their perceived worth often increases. That knowledge alone stabilizes them. They don't need to act on it. Women are told the opposite, that they're past their peak, that they're fading, that they're becoming invisible. Every birthday after 35 is treated like a loss. That messaging doesn't create acceptance. It creates desperation. A man at 40 knows he could still attract someone if he wanted to. That knowledge is enough. A woman at 40 fears this is her last chance to be chosen. That fear drives action. This difference isn't fair, but it is real, and it explains behavior that otherwise feels inexplicable. Male midlife crises embarrass. Female midlife crises detonate. Not because women are worse, but because the psychological framing is different. One reclaims youth through addition, the other through erasure. After she left, the rewriting accelerated. Our marriage became a cautionary tale, a story she told to justify her freedom. Anyone who questioned it was labeled unsupportive. Anyone who remembered differently was dismissed. I watched as shared history became unshared, as the truth splintered into versions. As the children absorbed contradictions they were too young to resolve. As the stability dissolved in the name of authenticity. She believed she was finally living honestly. What she was really doing was constructing a narrative strong enough to hold her ego together while everything else fell apart. And I realized something unsettling. This wasn't about me failing her. It wasn't about incompatibility. It wasn't even about love fading. It was about her inability to accept that a chapter had ended and another had begun. She wasn't running toward something better. She was running from something inevitable: aging, limitation, mortality. And I happened to represent all three. What I learned from all of this is uncomfortable, but it matters. The most dangerous moments in life don't arrive when things are falling apart. They arrive when everything looks fine and no one is paying attention to the quiet shifts inside. Identity, when left unexamined, can become a fragile structure. If it's built on things that time will inevitably take youth attention novelty, then time doesn't just change you. It threatens you. And when people feel threatened, they don't always choose wisely. They choose relief. They choose intensity. They choose stories that protect their ego instead of truths that protect their future. Real fulfillment doesn't come from feeling special over and over again. It comes from building something that can survive when feelings change. Desire fades. Excitement dulls. Validation runs out. That isn't failure. That's the price of staying long enough for depth to exist. A meaningful life isn't one that constantly feels good. It's one that still makes sense when it doesn't. If there's one lesson worth carrying forward, it's this: don't confuse panic with truth. Don't confuse restlessness with destiny. And don't let a temporary feeling talk you into a permanent decision. Time will take things from all of us. The question is whether we respond with wisdom or with fear. If this story resonated with you, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Tell me what part stayed with you or what you've seen in your own life. And if you want more conversations like this, calm, honest, and unfiltered, you can subscribe to the channel. No pressure, just if you think it's worth continuing the discussion.